All right, I think we are ready to begin our time together today. I want to introduce more formally our Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and Learning Initiatives here at Union Theological Seminary, David Gasworth. And he is going to more formally welcome you all into our space before we get diving into our conversation. So thanks, David. Hop on in.
Great, great. Well, welcome back from me. And we're saying welcome back because this is our first TIDEL Speaker Series event for this academic year. So we launched the TIDEL Speaker Series last year and did 7 or 8 of these Speaker Series talks over the course of the year. Just as some context, TIDEL, which is the Technology, Innovation, and Digital Engagement Lab, was born out of a desire to bring progressive faith leaders together to think collaboratively, strategically, and sustainably about the uses of technology to advance their mission. So the idea is that TIDEL is a facilitator as well as a provider of some learning spaces and funding to those groups that are looking to pilot and test out new ways of implementing technology. And then also a place where the lessons learned along the way are shared out with the other groups that are looking to do that kind of work. So that's what TIDEL is all about. We have a fellowship program, which is a very intense 12-month program for those who go through a rigorous application process and spend a year with us. But we also have these speaker series talks, which are designed to help kind of share the knowledge, spread information, and bring folks together around really important topics. And I'm very excited about today, in part because it's on a topic that's really, really important, but also because Michael Hannigan is our speaker. Michael and I actually met at the ATS Student Affairs Networking Conference, where he gave some fantastic presentations, and I came back to Dr. Gabby in her role as Director of Fellowship and Programs, and said, I really think the way he can talk about AI and ethics would resonate with our community. And so kind of that's the history of where this talk came from and where my relationship with Michael comes from. But, you know, in many ways, Dr. Gabby and Michael are gonna take this conversation and then open it up to those joining us. So feel free to chat, feel free to message the panelists and enjoy. Really appreciate you being here. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gabby.
All right. Thank you so much, David. We appreciate you. And I am excited to dive in. I first need to say this as a point of personal privilege. Our second cohort of fellows kick off the first weekend of October, but I see several of our new fellows in the room, which brings me a ton of joy. There's no such thing as extra credit in the fellowship, but if there were, y'all would be getting it because we haven't even officially begun yet. But if you're a TIDEL fellow who is incoming to our second cohort, would you just drop it in the chat? Let folks know that you are a part of our incoming cohort. I am thrilled to see you all, and I'm hopeful that others in the chat might show some love their way. All right, let's get going. I want to first more formally introduce Michael. Michael, I'm so glad that you're here with us. As David mentioned, he came back to campus raving about his time with you, and I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since. But Michael Hannigan is the founder of the Center for Future of Learning and Work. He is an adjunct professor of generative AI, learning and work at the University of Central Oklahoma and Rose State College. Michael is the co-author of Generative AI and Libraries, Claiming Our Place in the Center of a Shared Future. His recent work includes a series of micro-credentials related to generative AI and theological education as a part of the Faithfully Co-Creating series sponsored by the Association of Theological Schools, ALTA, and the Entrust Center for Theological Schools. He lives in Edmond, Oklahoma, And as a point of connection for this space, he spent some time in Morningside Heights, New York,
Good.
for a bit, while he was doing some leadership work over at Columbia, and while his wife was doing a theological degree here at Union. And Michael also holds an MDiv as well. So, Michael, welcome to the space. And I'm so thrilled that you're here. Before I get to our first question, let me take a moment to more formally introduce myself. My name is Dr. Gabby Cudjoe-Wilkes. I am thrilled to welcome all of you to our speaker series. I serve here at Union as the director of our Technology, Innovation, and Digital Engagement Lab Fellowship. I'm also the director of TIDEL programs. This speaker series is our flagship TIDEL program apart from our TIDEL fellowship. And we are really excited about letting this academic year be a year where we are expanding even more programming to audiences who are not our fellows, because we have heard you over the past 2 years. We've heard folks saying, hey, we love what you're doing. We want to be a part of the work, but I'm not a fellow. How can I get involved? And so I also want to shout out our inaugural cohort of fellows, because they put on a phenomenal fellow showcase in June of this year. And many of you were with us either physically or virtually. We had over 400 attendants. We also hosted our very first TIDEL Summit earlier this year in June at our sister school, the Teachers College at Columbia University, where we brought in folks physically into the space to talk about tech and innovation. So I am just thrilled that you all are here, and I invite you to remain with us. We will be soon rolling out a social networking platform for folks who are fellows and folks who are friends of TIDEL to be an even more deep dive conversation as the year progresses. Our goal is for that to be live by October of this year. So if you registered for this, you are now on our newsletter, our mailing list rather, and I invite you to lean in deeply, to use your voice and to be a part of this incredible movement that began 2 years ago and that is showing no signs of slowing down, which is TIDEL at Union. All right, Michael, let's hop in.
Yeah, let's do it.
I am, you and I have met a few times and had a few conversations. And so I want to throw the first question to you in a way that allows you to first speak about your work and
Sure.
also lets us just dive right in to some of the ways that you think about this work. Of course, today we're talking about what it looks like to be human in the age of AI, privacy, authorship, and authenticity, right? That's the title for today. But Michael, in our pre-conversations, you talked about this moment in 2025 with AI and everything else going on. You talked about this potentially being a golden age of learning.
Yeah.
And when Michael told me that in our pre-meeting, I was stopped in my tracks. I was like, every other educator I'm talking to has pause, has curiosities, some have straight up pushback, and you're talking golden age of learning. So
Yeah.
would you speak a bit about your work and then also tell us a bit about, why you see this as a golden age and an age of opportunity for
Yeah.
all of us?
Yeah. So thanks for having me. I'm excited to engage in this conversation. Let me tell you a little bit about my work, and I think that will help frame why I'm so optimistic. So since 2021, my primary work has been thinking about future of work and future of expertise, which was kind of my response to the emerging trends where our entire economy is moving from this kind of credential-based economy towards a more skill-based economy. And I thought that there were implications for that for expertise. Then generative AI comes along and we realize, the things I thought I had 20 years to solve, we have, 6 or 8 months to put to bed, and then we have deeper questions to ask. My theological training is actually at the intersection of trauma and theological development of both individual practice and traditions. So I'm really interested in the way in which suffering shapes and misshapes both the individual experience of life and the collective traditions in which people participate from a faith perspective. So I've always been interested in questions of how the world in which we live uh, can move us towards the world we want or move us further away from it, and how do we navigate those things. My work now, you'll always hear me talk about learning and work as a kind of a unified piece. And this is really because since the Industrial Revolution, learning and work have been bifurcated. They've been divorced from each other, right? So at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, you went to school for as long as you needed to do the work that you were going to do, right? My grandfather went to the 5th grade. My father got an undergraduate degree, and I just really love student loans, so I keep stacking letters on top of more on more and more. But the goal was that school really was just to prepare you for the world of work, right? Whatever that might be. And the only reason that you would ever return to school is if you needed to change the work that you had to do. And this divorce has really resulted in two problems that all collide at the present moment where we find ourselves. So in the world of learning, this means that the world of education has increasingly become disconnected from the real world of work, right? So we have questions about, do credentials really tell us anything? Just because you have a degree or some letters after your name, what does that tell me about you, what you're capable of? We see this concretely in a couple of headlines that have really been in the news in the last 6 months. We saw that as of this summer, 25% of the 2024 MBA Harvard graduating class didn't have jobs. Or we saw a piece in the New York Times recently where computer science grads from Stanford, one of the best programs in the world, are working at Chipotle, right? Like there are questions about, does this credential carry actual meaning, or is it more of a signal of like connection and kind of this social element? And so we've got lots of questions, especially in higher ed, like, is this useful? Is this valuable? Does it relate to the real world? In the world of work, the problem that we've had is that the infrastructure and the capacity for ongoing learning has atrophied to essentially nothing. So in the 70s and 80s, an HR department in a major corporation had instructional design, leadership development, educational theorists. Like we were ready to form and shape and train people. Now the world of work in HR is largely hire, fire, compliance, and PR. So we have these two worlds that are separate at the emergence of the largest upskilling and reskilling in human history, right? So we say we're going to have to learn more, and we're going to have to learn in different ways really quickly. And neither the world of learning nor the world of work are thoughtfully equipped to do that. My work is to explore how we reintegrate these two spaces. What does it mean to shape and reshape both people and the society in which we live in a world where technology disrupts this so quickly? And AI, I think, is it functions in two ways right now. One, it functions as a thing where people can attach their anxiety or their optimism, kind of depending on how they're bent, right? If you're nervous about where the world is going, it's easy to say, well, AI is just going to make it worse. And if you're optimistic about the place of technology in advancing society, you can say this is the thing that's going to save us. I don't think it's either one of those things. And we'll talk about that maybe. But here's why I think this can be the golden age of human learning. What generative AI makes possible to us is the lifting of limitations on human learning. Let me give you one example, and then maybe we can talk back and forth here.
Mm-hmm.
The 2024 Nobel Prize in Chemistry went to two individuals from Google DeepMind for a tool called AlphaFold. So AlphaFold is a protein modeling tool. So when we do drug discovery, we have to model a protein and understand not only its shape, but then how the drugs that we'll build or the interventions that we'll build for medicine attach to those proteins. It's very complex. Since the 1970s, we've been working on this problem. And from 1970 to 2023, we had modeled 1% of known proteins. In 2023, and to model one protein requires 4 to 5 years of PhD level work. So typically, a scientist will use their entirety of their PhD to model one protein. In 2023, AlphaFold modeled all of them. 200 million proteins. That is 1 billion years of PhD level work, free and publicly available to the world, used by 1.5 million scientists every day for drug discovery and medicine. We now live in a world, and AlphaFold 2, which won the Nobel Prize, has now been superseded by AlphaFold 3. And just 2 weeks ago, the CEO of Google DeepMind said, we're already working on 4. So we live in a world where we now have tools and technologies that enable learning at an exponential speed and scale that unlock all kinds of questions about progress and learning and advancement and innovation. And that doesn't mean, go ahead.
Yeah, can we, I want to just, I think there's some aha moments happening. I'm watching the emoticons. I, I think there was some aha moments happening around what you just said about AlphaFold, what you just said about how long it would take PhD trained folks to have to produce the same level of work. And I'm wondering if you can give that to us again, as the kids would say, on a lower shelf. So if you're like, I think I know what he's saying, because I think this is a ground shattering point, and you also talked about the Nobel Prize. So can you say that again?
Think about it this way. If we were to do that ourselves, say in the next 5 years, right? We would need about 200 million PhD students
to produce
what we did with that tool in a matter of months.
Now, there's some PhD folks in the comments, I'm sure, who are like, well, you just got rid of 200 million PhD.
And the answer is no. What you got rid of is this arbitrary limitation that we've only been able to work with such a small subset of what's possible for us to explore in drug discovery.
Yeah. And that's what makes this kind of the golden age, the golden age moment of kind of multiplying or amplifying the work, I would guess.
But not in an incremental way, right? It's I don't think it's unreasonable to say, what if you would have asked us in 2010, what is medicine going to look like in 2110? We would have kind of presumed the same rate of progress that we had from 2000 to 2010. I think it's reasonable, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, I think it's reasonable to do 50 to 100 years of medicine in the next decade.
In the next decade.
50
to 100 years of medical advancement in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Because of artificial intelligence?
Well, yeah, because you have 2 things. One, you have an acceleration, right? Like we could have modeled all those proteins. We just needed 1 billion years of work to do it. We know how to model them. It would have just taken a long time. So we have an acceleration of speed, but we also have an acceleration of scale. So there's another piece, and medicine is the place where this is most clear right now, but you can see how this might extrapolate to other spaces. There's a piece in the New York Times from this summer about a patient who was dying of a rare blood disorder where the solution that would work was a bone marrow transplant. We know this will work, but the patient was too sick for the transplant. And so the hospital just said, we're so sorry. Like, we can set up hospice, our condolences, there's nothing else we can do. His girlfriend reached out to a doctor who was working with generative AI tools that she had met at a rare disease summit. And he said, let me call you in the morning. So he called back, and using these tools, he had looked at all off-label uses of medicine. So it's like, this can be used for this, but this is not what it was made for. Like we see medicine all the time. It looked at all off-label uses of medicine and all interactions of all available off-label use of medicine. And he called back the next morning and said, okay, this is going to sound weird, but it's going to work. I need you to do this kind of chemo, this kind of steroid, and this other cocktail of medicine. And 12 weeks later, he got his bone marrow transplant.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there is no human being who can engage that level of information ever. Like, just it's a biological limitation, right? And that limitation no longer exists for humans to engage.
I'm seeing in the chat, Sean is saying, so does AlphaFold free up PhDs to now focus on other areas instead. What would you say to that?
Yeah, now we start doing drug discovery with all those proteins that we were modeling so that we would have more proteins to work with for drug discovery, right? So now
Yeah,
we just move on to the part that we're actually trying to get to,
that
right?
we need to.
Or we find some other frontier now that this problem that we thought was going to be with us effectively forever is a solved problem.
Yeah. Let's pivot a bit to the title of our talk today, being human and AI, and in particular, privacy, authenticity, and authorship. So there's a question in the chat from Mimi, really, I think relates to authenticity. She says, at this scale for AlphaFold, how can we verify that all the models are correct? So when we get into this kind of golden age of amplifying in a way that's not iterative, but it's literally just blowing past what our capability would be. How do we wrestle with authenticity? Who's checking and making sure that what's getting done is done in the way that if human beings were doing it would be attentive to? Let's get into a little bit of those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, the first piece here is that this is where people working with AI in their area of expertise is so important.
Mhm.
Don't ask me if that protein's right. I don't know.
Mm.
But I do trust that the people for whom that is their area know what they're doing, right? I think the other piece here is that when we think about how this really advances learning and we have questions about, I think trust but verify is always a good solution, right? I think that's true for all. That's just like a basic information literacy, right? Just because I read something doesn't mean it's always true. Like there is this need for, some critical thinking and some analysis. But the key here is that um, the places where this is having the most impact already um, are at the bleeding edge of expertise. Yeah, some people use AI to say, write this email better for me. And that's wonderful, right? That makes my life a little easier. It makes it maybe a little more enjoyable. The transformative capacities of these tools, right now at least, are really at the edges, right? At those
Mhm.
kind of more complex, more difficult, more what we call wicked problems, right? Problems that are just harder to solve and have been around for a long time.
Yeah. I did a little bit of polling in the chat, and I'm going to invite others to respond as you see fit. But I tried to get a sense of who we have in the room, right? So I'm trying to get a sense of how many folks are in theological education, how many folks are in nonprofit leadership, how many folks are in congregational ministry. And for those who have responded, we've got a bit of theological education representation. We've got some bivocational folks, got some congregational leadership folks. So I want to put on our theological education hat. I want to
Please.
first make sure we had enough people in the room to
Yes, yes.
justify that term. I think we do. And they're continuing to respond. One of my really good friends is here, Pastor Cato Fikuru, who's a PhD student at Fordham and a pastor in the Bronx. Good to see you. And so as folks are kind of self-identifying with their sector, I want to make a theological education pivot because the
Yeah.
first part of our conversation has been really helpful to use the medical sector because we all can relate to what we need medicine to do because we've all been sick or known somebody who's been sick, right? But let's talk a little bit, let's pivot a little bit to a lot of our work, right? And so arguably, whether you're in the nonprofit sector, whether you're in theological education, or whether you're a congregational leader, arguably you are being put in a position where trust, authenticity, your ability to kind of hold space, a helping profession of sorts, is at the highest is at the highest level for our work, right?
Yeah.
And so it's many of the folks in this meeting right now, in this speaker series, are probably the same folks who are wondering, do I risk anything by leaning on AI too much? Am I giving away private details when I'm using ChatGPT, when I'm leaning on these things that accelerate my work, but potentially expose my constituents, right? My parishioners, what have you.
Sure. Sure.
Um, we've talked a bit, you and I, Michael, about how those who've been theologically formed have access to certain language and
Mhm.
certain frameworks for meaning making that might help us as we think about what it looks like to be human in this moment of quickly moving technologies.
Yeah.
Can we talk a bit about that? What is the
Yeah.
theological foundation formation foundation grant us as we try to make meaning of this moment we're in?
Yeah. So right now, what you're seeing is a flurry of research in every discipline. What does AI mean for the world in which we live? Right. This week, I've been looking at papers from economics, social science, philosophy, like every field is saying, what does this mean? Theological education is unique in that it doesn't really play by any disciplinary boundaries. Sometimes we joke in theological education that you're going to end up doing some history, some language, some social science, some philosophy, some ethics, and some religious studies, and that's going to be Tuesday, right? That's how theological education works.
That's Tuesday.
Right. That's that one class for week 2, right? That's not over the course of my program, but in these other ways. So part of what we find is that narrow disciplines, think, for example, like economics and social science, even philosophy and ethics, some of these other, even in the technical side of AI, even in like the kind of engineering and design components, it is difficult for them to get outside of the areas of inquiry that exist in their space. So for example, if you look at some of the technical literature about like how we design tools for learning, they're primarily built by engineers. And so what they do is they build the most capable version that they can. And then we say, we hope this helps for learning. And it's an open question about whether or not that's actually going to happen, right? Theological education finds itself in a particularly wonderful place because it has deep resources to ask questions about what this means for real people and real communities. And we're not afraid of pulling multiple disciplines together to ask these questions. So let me give you an example. The most prestigious book award in sociology this year went to a wonderful book that everyone here should read. It is called The Last Human Job by Allison Pugh.
I'm intrigued already. The Last Human Job.
It is exploring the consequences of automation and accelerating technology on what she calls connective labor, which is the work of seeing and being seen. And she actually opens with a story that would resonate very much with theological education. She opens the book with a story of a chaplain who has to come into a room. A patient is about to be intubated and they're frightened, obviously, and the chaplain is there for support, but the patient is not allowed to speak because they're about to be intubated. And the chaplain reflexively grabs a box of Kleenex and says, if you need to throw this across the room, to have some kind of expression of whatever you're feeling, you can do that. And instead, the patient grabs the chaplain and holds them until they're intubated. A beautiful moment of connective labor. And then Allison follows the chaplain out of the room while she spends a significant amount of time entering this vulnerable moment of human connection as some kind of measurable data in health records.
Mm-hmm.
To try and quantify what a chaplain does, right, in some meaningful way. And what this book raises are these questions about kind of possible futures of what automation means for connective labor. Sometimes automation means that connective labor is reserved for those who can afford it, and automation is reserved for those who cannot, right? That there's like a class
kind of premium on the human touch.
So concierge service,
concierge level,
and automated, right?
Yeah.
You get, if you can't afford to pay, you get the bot, and if you can afford it, you get white glove service, right? This is one trajectory. But because they're brilliant questions, but because they're coming from a sociological lens, there's very little capacity to say, here's what we should do. It's merely observation, because that's what her discipline does, right? And so the question is, well, where do you turn to say, okay, all of these things could happen. How will we build a world that doesn't make these mistakes that she so beautifully lays out? Well, that's where we live, right? This is where theological education is perfectly primed to come in and say, yes, we do believe in a world of the value of human connection, of the way that our institutions are shaped, does shape not only if we use technology, but how we use it in a way that is good for humans, not in a way that is just good for some humans, right? These kind of more fundamental questions.
Yeah.
We are probably some of the only people suited to ask these questions. I
Though
also
you say, when you say we, you mean those that are theologically trained.
yeah. I mean, I also teach in an MBA program, right? And we have all kinds of conversations about what does it mean to integrate these tools into industry in a way that is human-centered, right? And here's what I find is that when asked to provide literature from the world of business about how to do that in a way that is human-centered, I don't know where to find it.
Hmm.
And so what
Even
did I
something
start
like
doing?
human-centered design has its limitations
Yeah,
around the theological underpinnings of what it means to be human.
yeah. And so what I ended up doing, um, without my students really understanding, is I just started pulling explicitly from my theological education. I just kind of stripped it of all of its religious language and just said, here's a framework that we make sure that, right,
Can you give
that,
us an
that
example of a framework that
yeah.
you kind
So
of
like
brought to your MBA students, but it was really rooted in your theological education?
yeah, I think there's there's some work from the German theologian Dorothy Solle that I really love, who's always interested in the intersection of kind of social challenge and kind of the formative way in which we shape people to rise up to social challenge. She would, when she wasn't at Union, when she would go back to Germany for half the year, she would go and they would have these events where they would bring in a world-class expert in some social problem and they would learn just as much as they could. You know, one of their most famous events of this was they brought in the chief UN nuclear deproliferation person in the 1980s. And after they learned, Soleil and her co-conspirators had created a liturgy for everyone to pray and commit to enacting what they had learned. And part of what we started talking about in my MBA course is that it's one thing to understand kind of these technology adoption models and the way that these things get integrated, but to also design spaces where you form and nurture and sustain human beings who have to go through this transition is an essential piece of how we do this. And for them, they were like, "This is amazing. Where did this come from?" And I was like,
You're
"Not from
like,
an MBA,
You're
right?"
like, I got a
Uh,
place it comes from.
yeah,
Let me start. Let me say to the audience, we're at the halfway mark. So please, if you have questions, I would love for you to raise your hand and share. There's one question that was so rich in the chat that I sent a message to her and asked her to be willing to unmute and share.
yeah,
Geneva, if you're able, would love for you, first of all, welcome to the space. And would love for you to just let us know where you're, coming in from. And if you wouldn't mind amplifying the question that you framed in the chat, would love for you to get into the conversation.
My name is Geneva, and I live in Philadelphia, and I'm involved in congregational life there. And I love the example of medicine and how AI can really amplify and make solutions possible that we couldn't have thought about before. But what about the human relationships? For example, getting along with others who are different,
yeah.
violence,
Mhm.
poverty. How do we tackle these quality of life issues? I know a lot has been done on loneliness, and some of it I think is maybe not too constructive. It's kind of deconstructive. It doesn't put human beings together. So
Yeah.
how can we use AI to enhance human life?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think one of the things we need to do is frame that there is no single trajectory of how this shapes our life. So let me back up before I answer your question and talk about how generative AI is a different kind of technology. There are two primary ways that we think about technology. The first is what we call an adoption technology, which is like, I choose to participate, right? Like, you remember when you got your first cell phone, right? It was kind of a weird event. It didn't really fit in your pocket. You know, I didn't make a lot of calls before 7 p.m. because I was cheap. You know, it was just a different, but my life wouldn't have been like materially different had I waited a little bit or started a little sooner or whatever that is, right? Almost all technology are adoption technologies. And they often take a long time. The second category, which is much more rare, is what's called an arrival technology. So this is a technology that shapes and reshapes the world in which you live, whether or not you participate. So think about the steam engine and what that meant for manufacturing and the economy, or you think about electrification, or you think about telecommunications or the internet, right? Even if to this day you still don't really participate in the internet, first of all, we are on the internet right now,
Right.
right? And second of all, there is probably no area of your life that is not touched by it. Your medical records live there, your debit card runs through it, like the street light that you're driving through operates in that way. Generative AI is not an adoption technology. It is an arrival technology. But it also breaks all the rules of other arrival technologies. So when we think about technologies that really transform society, like one example of this is refrigeration, right? Think about all the consequences for society when you can preserve food in a meaningful way. For us to get to 100 million people in the United States who used refrigeration, it took 50 years. For us to get 100 million people who use ChatGPT, took 61 days.
Yeah.
10% of adults on the planet use ChatGPT. It's 2.5 years old. So like part of it is that in some sense it follows these trajectories of these other arrival technologies in that it shapes and reshapes the world whether or not you individually participate. But it breaks all the rules of speed and scale.
Of speed and what?
And scale.
And scale.
So part of this is that other technological things that we've been working on, like we've been talking about artificial intelligence meaningfully since the 1950s. The difference is that now we can produce hardware that can make theory reality. Right. So now we're able to produce chips and data centers and other kinds of things that actually are capable of doing what we said would be really neat if we can. So when we think about what it means for our society as an arrival technology, the answer is we're not entirely sure. If you would have asked 10 years after electrification came and New York City was finally electrified, what this was going to mean for the city, it was a mixed bag. Some things were great and some things were not, right? Because a technology can be used in a whole variety of ways. Think about all the ways that electricity is used. It is used in ways that are good for us, in ways that are harmful for us, for individually and for our shared life. I think part of what we're going to find is that generative AI presents us this spectrum of both peril and promise. So if we were to think about, if you want to read, on your particular question, Geneva, if you want to read a book that keeps you up at night, it's called The Structure of Ideas. And here's the premise. In the 19th century, the Supreme Court said they invented this idea of the marketplace of ideas. This was part of a Supreme Court opinion. That supposedly the presumption was that two lies and a truth could walk into the room, and the majority of the time the truth would win out. And I don't know that that was always true. It's certainly less true now than it used to be, if it was ever true in the first place. Then as technology has advanced in American society and we had the internet, and then now we have algorithms that drive the internet, it is possible to find yourself in increasingly tight and narrow silos. What generative AI introduces is the ability to not only sort us into silos, but actually to create the material of that silo. We now have the ability to create a silo of one person. So it wouldn't be me and my people think this way, it could just be me. In the same way, we find that this same technology is already superhuman at persuasion in dissuading people from conspiracy theories. We already see that for people with profound mental illness. We're already seeing in advanced, high quality clinical trials that it's more effective than months and months of therapy with a person. And so we find ourselves in this spread of promise and peril at the same time. One of the things that I love so much about Alison Pugh's book, The Last Human Job, is it really does give us a framework to say, part of the world that we will inhabit is what we will allow. That we have agency in some way. If we choose to sit back and wait and see what Silicon Valley gives to us, we're probably not going to like it, to be honest. But if we are willing to leverage these technologies in ways that are good for human beings and to raise these kinds of questions, we have the chance to build a world that we might actually want.
Thank you for that, Michael. Let me let me hop in a little bit. I want to also the edges of your question, Geneva, about AI, what it means to be human, and kind of how it impacts human relationship. I think everything that Michael said is really, really helpful. I would also offer that some of this is going to be being human in the midst of this arrival tech is like being willing to educate ourselves so that we can help our communities who might be slower to adapt this disruptive arrival technology that's going to affect their lives either way, right? So I want to name that, Geneva, when you ask, well, what does it mean for human relationships? What does it mean for XYZ? What it's going to mean is there's going to be an in crowd and an out crowd. I mean, we've always had an in crowd and an out crowd, but it's going to be even more divisive. Who is able to adapt and respond to this arrival tech and who is not. So for instance, I'm a millennial, right? I'm 40 years old, but I remember being in 7th grade where computer was mandatory. And I had to learn how to put my fingers on the home keys because this thing called the World Wide Internet was here and wasn't going anywhere. It was right around the time that personal computers were now affordable enough to be in people's homes and not solely in these kind of like really advanced offices. And as the world was changing, my generation was required to learn this in school. So I actually don't remember a time where I didn't know how to type on a computer. But imagine generations, 2 generations older than me, right? Who weren't school aged when this happened. They were watching their jobs change and require them to have skill sets they were never taught, right? And so what I would offer is a part of being human might be while these middle school students are getting this in middle school and they're gonna be all right 20 years from now, these folks that are already 60 years old, who've been working on their job for 40 years, don't recognize that this arrival technology is going to disrupt their ability to continue on the same job they've had for 40 years. So the human part of me is going to learn the tech. I'm going to go sit in the rec center or the library. I'm going to learn the tech so that I can then get a room full of seniors and say, hey, you all, I know you don't want to learn this. But the human part of me, the theologically formed part of me says this arrival technology, which is not adaptive technology, is coming and it's disrupting. And I want to make sure that you as a human being are prepared and can shift when this necessarily disrupts the rhythms of normalcy that you've known for 20 plus years, right? So I would offer that some of the humanity of this moment is not going to be through tech. It's going to be through human beings deciding, let me help democratize tech, right? And so with that, I want to cue, I'm looking at our time. I want to cue at least 2 questions that I've seen in the chat. And then if others have questions, I want to get to you all as well. There's a question from S. James about the digital divide. And there's a question from Karen Louise Walker, about what it looks like to verify things that have been AI enhanced.
Yeah.
I want to get both of those questions answered. And then if anyone else has questions, we'll allow you to raise your hand and to hop in here. So S. James, I see you've already got your hand raised. Would you like to amplify your question and hop in here? Let us know where you're coming in from. And we cannot hear you if you're speaking. We saw you unmuted, but we can't hear you for whatever reason.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Good afternoon. Dr. Gabby, you just said something that kind of took me away from the question I put in the text, which is
Okay.
you talked about people who are 60, late 50s, early 60s, and their capacity to adapt. And let me say this, I'm in my 50s, I'm working in government, I'm also pastoring a church, and I got to tell you, every day I come in to show you the fact that people in my age group are dealing with this every day, which is every day I come in, my computer looks different at work.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so we people who are in every age group are constantly evolving with the technology. So I don't want you to get the wrong impression that people who are younger or millennials are equipped to deal with these massive changes, and people who are older or not. If you are still in the workforce right now today, you are impacted and you are aware and you have learned how to adapt to this reality that we are dealing with. But the question I really
Well, let
wanted
me
to,
let me respond before
go
you
ahead.
get to your question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I think my example might have gotten lost in my labeling myself for my own generation.
Okay,
My example, and this is important that it comes through, the example I was giving.
yeah,
The example that I was giving is that at whatever age one is when new technology is introduced, if it is something that has been normative for you, that you haven't had to learn, I'm saying that
right,
folks who haven't had to learn it, because it's just been with them since they've been alive, that there's a duty
yeah,
on those folks as a human being to get to the folks who are in the process of learning it. So, and that's
okay,
my answer to Geneva's question about what does it mean to be human
yeah,
in the age of rapidly changing technology. So, to
okay,
your point about every time you look at your computer, it has changed. What I'm saying is the human part of this change, because I have my job is that I have to stay up to date on these things. So I'm always learning.
right,
What I'm saying is that the human piece of this, because Geneva's question was about the human piece. The human piece is if this is something that someone else down the hall knows, the human piece is let me come and winnow down how long it takes for all of us to learn this. Not saying that you cannot learn it, saying that if someone is there on the hall who knows it, the humanity of us is going to outpace the tech by saying, yeah, you could sit here and teach yourself, but if there's someone in the same office who actually knows what they're up to, the human piece of them
right,
would be beneficial for them to spread the knowledge to the team around them because these changes are coming, whether we're ready for them or not. That was the heart of
right.
my example.
Got it.
And forgive me if by naming my self-location, if that made it seem as though it were ageist or making assumptions about age.
No, not at all, not at all. No,
So
I mean, and it's
I'm
not,
naming that because
and,
I
right.
think your response to my example helps me to see how other folks may have heard it. So
Right.
thank you. What's your other
And
question?
it's not a bad, it wasn't a negative statement. But the other thing is this, again, the question was given the fact that there is a vast digital divide on the basis of race and ethnicity, which begins from elementary education. And Dr. Craig Goodwin Ortiz also pointed out to me and to all of us that this is not just an issue that affects urban communities, but also rural communities. So it may more be of a socioeconomic issue. But the
Mhm.
question is, what does this mean for the future of young people growing up in, I guess, socioeconomically disadvantaged communities who know how to use the technology for entertainment purposes, but are not sophisticated enough in many instances on a large scale to be able to utilize the technology for the purposes of enhancing their socioeconomic growth.
Yeah. So there's a couple things here. In the chat, I posted a screenshot from the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report. These are the skills that are the most important for the next 5 years. And I want you to notice two things here. One, almost none of them are content skills. They're almost all human skills, right? These are skills that can be formed urban, rural, suburban, rich, poor, right? These are real human capacities that can be nurtured in all those spaces. The other thing that's interesting here is that another rule that generative AI breaks is that most premium technologies are restricted to people who can pay for them, right? We're all
Mm.
used to the free version or the trial version being available to everyone, and then the Cadillac version being available to those who can pay. Right now, at least, and I don't see any reason that this is going to change anytime soon, the leading edge of this technology is available for free. So there is no gap in the capability of the tool that you have access to, whether there's money involved or not. What there is a gap for is this long-standing gap, as you've pointed out, in the way in which education and other forms of social nurture are provided.
Sharing your document, Michael, just in case folks have difficulty opening it in the chat.
Yeah.
So, Michael, I have a follow-up question. When you say it's available for free, are you talking about in terms of the knowledge that one is
No.
able? Okay.
So yeah, I'm talking about the technology itself. The
Okay.
challenge with the knowledge piece is that gets developed in real time. So like my primary work is in AI and education, because I think it's easier to get the education side up to speed than it is to bend all of industry back in the other direction. And the approach has to change almost every time the capabilities move. So for just as a practical example, a year ago, like the way that you did prompting was very, very important. Like you had these like complex structures and these practices that you needed to use. And now that the tools have gotten 2 or 3 degrees better, it's not a useful skill anymore.
I'm gonna
Because you
hop
have
in
tools
here,
that can
Michael.
create those things for you.
Yeah, I'm gonna hop in here, Michael, just to advance us to our question from Karen Louise. I just want to
Yeah.
make sure that we have time for her as we're in our last 5 minutes. Karen Louise, you will have the last question. If you're available, you can unmute and just amplify your question, please.
Great. Thank you. It was interesting listening. Clearly, there's an advocacy piece to anything we do, right? My question has to do with the integrity of AI. Sources are coming from all kind of places. Information is, we have a wealth of information. I don't know statistically, but I know enough to know a lot of it is wrong. And the question has to do with how do we, or what is happening to ensure that through technology that because I'm a proponent of it, what is happening to ensure that there aren't these scams, that there aren't these misinformation, and these avenues that are bogus. That's one. And then when you put up that chart, it elevated for me again. How do you promote and develop independent critical thinking and the work of the learning? Because you have students that's going to pull up the AI. We know we have a system that can screen it and tell them, yeah, you cheated. But the beauty of having information and having access is wonderful. The efficiency of it is wonderful. But then there's this other part that says, that person that says drink bleach and you'll be healed.
So there are a couple of questions here that I think are important. One is generative AI changes the way we engage knowledge consumption and production. And it's early enough that the answer is we don't really know all the ways that it will do that. But the other piece is I don't think there'll be one answer to that question. Much in the same way that like some people used to say the internet would be the end of culture, and some of it said it would be the greatest thing that ever happened to learning, and the internet we have now is just kind of a mess. Right? You kind of get what you pull from it. I think much in the same way, this is why we need to think about the human component and not necessarily first and foremost the technological component. What I would love to see is us invest deeply in helping people to think about how we engage those critical faculties, how we leverage technology in a way that strengthens those capacities instead of atrophies them. The reality is this technology is here and it can be used to enhance or to outsource the way in which you work in the world. And that choice is not going to be a one-time choice for anyone. It's going to be a perpetual choice, right? Am I going to use this to do it for me, or am I going to use it to do it better? That's a question that we'll have to ask every time we come to this technology in these ways. What we need then to do is focus on how we form people who have both the ethics and skills to take the better side of that span of possibilities, right? And that's where our faith communities, I think, are essential here. This is where we think about not only like the privacy and security pieces, right? Like we're gonna have to do a lot of work pretty soon about scams that are different. In my parents' house, by the phone on the wall is a post-it note that says, if I call and ask for money, this is the question you have to ask, and this is the answer I have to give. Because I've already cloned my voice for a project where I didn't have time to narrate a paper, and I couldn't tell the difference. Right. So faith communities and theological education and the nonprofits that we serve are going to be places of trust where we can talk meaningfully about these questions, and where we can begin to think deeply about how we manifest and how we nurture and sustain the kinds of skills that we're going to need to navigate that. And the skills that I shared, those are the skills. We know what we need to build. The question is now, who can help us, and will we? I think.
Michael, thank you so much. I want to, as we're closing, amplify for the question that S. James raised and Craig co-signed. There's an initiative run by a phenomenal woman by the name of Dr. Fallon Wilson. It's called the National Collaborative for Digital Equity. I have placed the website in my response directly to S. James, but I will also place it here. This is a large conversation that really got a lot of momentum during the pandemic when we recognized that young people were being sent home to learn from home, and they did not have connectivity, they did not have computers, they did not have iPads, they had no way of being able to learn. It's not an issue that began in the pandemic, it's an issue that the pandemic gave visibility to, which released a lot of federal funding. And so that funding is under attack right now, but it has been flowing for the past 5 years up until now. And I encourage folks who are interested in this work to connect with Dr. Fallon Wilson and to support. They're doing this work all across the nation. Also, to Karen Louise Walker's conversation, I just want to name, I put it in the chat as a response as well. I think the being human part of our duty is for folks in this room to be willing to create AI literacy conversations, week-long sessions, monthly sessions, what have you, where you can literally teach people how to look for indications that something is not authentic via AI. I think we're going to really be to that question about what does it mean to be human. I think it's going to be humans really that trust and verify that Michael mentioned, human beings really being on the wall to educate and learn together. If you don't know it flat out, come to centers like TIDEL to get your learning and then amplify it back into your communities. I want to thank Michael for his time. We're right at our closing point. I also want to announce that our guest next month will be Dr. Philip Butler. We'll be talking about the sustainability of artificial intelligence. Dr. Philip Butler has done a lot of work around what it looks like to deal with the ecological sustainability of AI, to make sure that the eco-justice dimension of this work is showing up as we look at what it looks like to engage AI. Dr. Philip Butler is the director of the AI Institute and a professor of theology and Black post-human artificial intelligence at Iliff Theological Seminary. So you'll want to join us. That will be October 30th at 5:00 p.m. also on Digital Space. Michael, please let folks know how they can stay in contact with you, and if you have anything coming up, how they can connect to your work.
Yeah, please find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to drop my email here in the chat. Please reach out. I am increasingly running around in theological education circles, which has been a lot of fun. It's good to be back in my roots. So I hope that I'll be popping up in more places here and there as we go. And
Great.
as always, just make sure that if you need me, you can just call Gabby and she'll make it happen.
There you go. I love it. Thank you all so much for your time. Enjoy your afternoons and have a great evening.
All right. Thank you.